So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the panel now some of the top names in the automotive industry. We have Alex Smith, MD of Volkswagen Group UK.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
James Brearley, CEO of Inchcape UK.
Thanks for the invite.
Angela Shepherd, CEO Mercedes-Benz Retail.
Hi, great to be here.
Robert Forrester, CEO of Vertu Motors Group.
Thanks, Julia.
And Nathan Coe, CEO of Auto Trader Group PLC. Nathan.
Well, thanks for having me.
There's always one. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed the sessions already that's taken place already today. And in this session, we're here to discuss game-changing leadership, because we believe that those who unleash the benefits of gender balance, inclusion, and diversity are true game changers. So I'm going to ask our panel members to share their views, and then we're going to go to questions submitted by the audience. So please do start submitting questions. So Alex, if I can turn to you first. So Volkswagen Group had already set an ambitious gender balance goal, but since you became MD, it's evident that you're driving the change with much vigor and pace. So what convinced you to make it such a strategic imperative?
Well, I think, as you say, there's been a focus on diversity and inclusion at Volkswagen Group some considerable time. If it feels that it's being driven with more vigour and more pace, it might just be that I've got a larger mouth. And I think because I think realistically, if you look at what my job is as MD of a national sales company, a major part of it is to attract the best talent into the organisation. So by definition, 50% of the available talent, so the best human talent, is female. So realistically, if we're underperforming on that metric, then we're missing out on the best talent that we could have in the business. It's a people business. You know, we don't build the cars in the NSC. We get the wonderful products to sell, and then the value that we add is through human talent. So it's my responsibility to get the best talent into this organisation, and if it's not balanced in every respect, then we're missing out, and I'm not doing my job, frankly. So that's why it's so fundamentally important to me individually, but it's been important to the organisation for a very, very long time. And if it seems that we're going a bit faster, or at least we're being a bit more vocal about it, then that's quite deliberate, because, as I say, part of my role is to ensure that that Volkswagen Group UK is known for being a welcoming, inclusive organisation with a strong focus on equality and fairness. So it's good to hear that it seems that we're driving it with a lot of vigour, because one, we are, and number two, if that's the external perception, then I'm glad we're representing ourselves correctly externally. So yeah, it's absolutely core to everything we are.
It certainly is the impression that's being given out there in the marketplace, that's for sure. So turning to James now. So as a veteran of the retail side of the industry, you'll be well versed in the need to balance short-term crises and performance with the long-term business success. And this year has crystallised that need for many of us. So how can we keep focused on the change needed to become inclusive over the long term during this difficult period?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for the veteran piece, Julia. I mean, but in all honesty, I have been in the retail business for, well, I mean, certainly well into my fourth decade. And in that time, one thing that the business has shown me is that where you're representative of the community that you operate in, you're more successful. So no question in my mind that that's the case. And it sounds obvious, but if you look at the gender balance perspective, 50% of the people in the country are female, 50% are male, and that goes for drivers clearly. So if you're in the business of selling and servicing cars, then logic tells you that this should be the sort of balance of your business, frankly. I think probably the most important part of the question you just asked is actually this piece about focus on change. I think that's the important bit. And, like anything in life, if you want to change something, you've got to really make a conscious decision to do so. If I just talk about for a second or two about Inchcape as a company, we operate. I don't think many people probably know this outside the company. We operate in 34 different countries. So naturally, as a business, we're incredibly diverse. And quite a while ago, so 3 years ago, all of the team, myself included, on our global executive board, we underwent an unconscious bias training assessment to start with, and then training and coaching. And I have to say, it was something that, if I speak from a really personal point of view, it was really quite painful to go through. It was, a little bit uncomfortable. Didn't quite know what it was going to tell me about myself, but actually, it was a really enlightening experience. And frankly, all of us know how to deal with each other better at the end of that. So, from a practical perspective, one thing that I think all of your audience could do is to go and go through that assessment and just learn a bit about themselves. You don't have to pay somebody to do it. There are plenty of assessments on the internet you can get for free.
That's really good advice. So, and that helped you obviously identify where you felt that there were challenges and to overcome.
Sure.
Thanks. So moving on to Angela then. So you started your role as CEO of Mercedes-Benz Retail at the end of 2019. And so what a roller coaster first year that you must have had. So at the beginning of your journey to gender balance in this role, what plans have you made to lead the necessary culture change?
Well, I think certainly it's fair to say I probably didn't really know what I was letting myself in for. Aside from the role, I hadn't expected the pandemic to hit quite where it did. And I think what's interesting for us is that we are right at the start of this journey. So, it's a business that's been running for 20 years. And I'm not saying that there haven't been various diversity and inclusion programs, including gender diversity, over that period, but certainly it wasn't top of the agenda when I joined. And as you say, had many, many other things to deal with. And, it's very easy, isn't it, when those emergencies are, at your doorstep, to leave things like this to a later point in time. But I think one of the things that was very clear to us was that a strategic change was an imperative. And I think the other thing that was very clear is that these things don't happen overnight. So much in line with what some of my colleagues said earlier, you can't expect to literally, snap your fingers and people change their attitudes and, great people rock up at the door and all of that kind of thing. So we had to basically put a list of very pragmatic things in place that start us very much on the journey and put us on track to get to where we want to go. And again, we haven't even set a timeline for that because I think we're so early on. This is really about discussing it amongst the leadership team. So, and I guess one of the things that we do have in our favour is, I've been put in as, a female CEO, and that makes obviously quite a bold statement about our organisation. And for those of you that know our wholesale operation, there's many, many female leaders in the senior team, and I came from that stable, but there's never been that in the own retail group. So I think that in itself was a game changer, made a very bold statement to the employees in the organisation, of which there are 1,400. It's a big operation. So I think that was the first thing. The second obvious thing then is to talk about with the leadership team, what will their individual functions look like in 2 or 3 years' time, to start to get that dialogue underway and say, okay, we're starting here. That's where we are, status quo. Where do we want to get to? And then to examine in quite granular detail how we can actually get there, so that we're starting to influence those individuals in senior roles, to influence people in less senior roles, to take not necessarily vertical career paths, but have a little bit more lateral thought about where that talent and pipeline might come from in the next 2 or 3 years. I think then probably the next bit from that comes succession planning, and again, start of our journey. It's been done, whether it's been done to celebrate all the needs that we have for cultural diversity, including gender, across our business, maybe perhaps wasn't quite as centre point on the agenda as it is now, and very clear that gender is just one aspect of diversity. So, and we have a very multicultural workforce in our organisation, so we're very lucky to have that as well. But we need to incorporate that as well, and not to switch any part of our organisation off by thinking it's just a gender diversity programme, because that would be a real shame if we did that. I think this is just one of those things we need to encourage. And then I guess lastly, kind of taking some of those females that we've got that have potential for leadership in, I don't know, between now and 2 or 3 years or 5 years' time, networking them together with other individuals in the business that have got potential and are interested in this topic. I don't know, creating even virtual functions where they can buddy up, find a mentor. Again, many of the pragmatic things that have been talked about this morning. So for me, it's very much about very small steps, but things that take us, take us on the right journey. It's not, I don't want it to become a personal crusade. And I guess that's where maybe I'm different to some of the colleagues here. I could easily go along a female CEO and, it's absolutely a personal crusade that we force this on the agenda. It shouldn't be like that either. It's got to be in balance with everything else that we need to do. But it's been an interesting year. I think I've had a whole career in 12 months.
Hit the ground running.
Something like that.
Thanks very much, Angela. So I'm going to turn to you, Nathan, now. So I was struck by the power of the phrase you once used in an interview when you said that it's as much about the battle against exclusion as it is about inclusion. And this showed to me that as a leader, you framed the challenge perfectly. So can you share your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a similar experience to James. I've definitely accelerated on the journey towards creating more diverse and inclusive teams over the past few years. But as you said, for me, it's very positive to speak about diversity and inclusion. They're both positive concepts. But if you flip it around, and the more time I spent kind of learning about this myself, the truth was actually there are people, no doubt within my own organisation and within society more broadly and other organisations, that are actually very good people, very talented people, but they feel different. They feel on the outside. They feel like they're in the minority, which means that they might not be accepted as they are, or they worry that they have to work twice as hard to progress. And as a result of that, sometimes they may not put up their hand to be spotted as talent, which I totally agree with Alex, that the talent is pretty evenly balanced, but their willingness to put themselves forward may not always be. And that doesn't seem fair to me. It doesn't seem like it's their problem that you can throw it back to them and say, well, you've just got to be more confident. You've just got to be more willing to put up your hands. So to me, it felt like, well, I have a responsibility in this organisation to make sure people of all sorts of backgrounds, including gender, but neurodiversity, ethnicity, all those characteristics that make up the rich society that we live in, can be properly represented in our own organisation. And I think whilst we don't get too hung up on creating a business case around this, and I know you talk about that definitely in the book, I really do believe and have seen that balanced teams do make better decisions because they fundamentally better understand either the people within your own organisation that we're all paid to lead, or the society and customers in which you serve, which James spoke about. I also think you get better engagement, better cultures, and as Alex said, I think you discover talent that I do think we would seriously, otherwise it might just remain hidden, and we're all there saying the most important thing is talent. That's the hardest thing to find. But if you're kind of insist on talent looking like a certain stereotype, you are literally going to limit the pool from which you can pull. So I do completely agree with that. And like I said, it was that exclusion, the fact that people in our organisation are there feeling excluded, felt wrong, actually, and really jolted me to action.
Thanks, Nathan. I suppose you could actually argue that there are some people, however, that you do need to consider excluding. And I'm going to turn to Robert now. So, Robert, you said about my book that it makes for uncomfortable reading and shows the work that has to be done. And you started initiating the change in Virtu by tackling head-on an extremely important issue that damages the business, yet many people find it uncomfortable to acknowledge, and that's sexual harassment in the workplace. So can you please tell us about your zero tolerance policy?
Yeah, I mean, at Virtu, we try and operate with a certain number of values. and they're very important to us. And one of our key values is respect. And when I joined the motor industry, and I think it's changed massively actually in the last 20 years, it's 20 years since I joined the sector. You'd walk into service departments and there'd be soft porn posters in technicians' areas. And I thought, this is a very strange setup. And then you actually heard the horror stories of the past, which I think are largely in the past now, of, you know, rampant sexual harassment. And I have come across that in our business over the years. But I think if you've got a very, very, very strict set of values, and one being respect, then you can set an expectation that this is just not acceptable. And when you come across it, and I've had a few instances actually in the last 5 or 10 years, and we have taken a very hard line on it and removed people from the business, quite rightly. And even though you tend to be worried about the profit impact of that, if it's a very high performer, and sometimes they are high performers, you know, toxic achievers, I think is a good description of some of these people. You need just to take the action, because if you don't, you're sending a completely wrong message as a leader. And I had a particular example a few years ago where I was worried about the profitability of a dealership. There was in my view, a poor case around sexual harassment, and actually it was the best thing I ever did. We've doubled the profitability of that dealership. And I think we would have been in big trouble had we tried to cover up what was actually going on. I think it was very, very poor leadership. So I think having a zero tolerance, we as an organisation never regret taking that strict action. And when we don't take strict action on values, it always comes home to bite us, to be honest.
And I think it's a really important message to hear, that quite often these people, if they're showing poor judgment in this area of life, they're probably making the wrong choices and decisions in the business as well.
Oh, totally. Poor character spills over, doesn't it? Poor character choices spill over into the business, and it's not good.
Thanks for sharing that, Robert. So returning to you now, Angela. So we're seeing, thankfully, we're so pleased to see it, so many more women like you now taking up top jobs in the sector. So do you think that we're starting to see a new profile of leader emerge? And if so, what more can be done to build the pipeline of inclusive female leaders?
Yeah, so I guess in answer to the question about are we starting to see a new type of leader emerge, I think we are. I think it's still quite slow. And, you know, I always remember my old boss, who many of you will know, saying, you know, Angela, when I took this job, you know, you're one of 3 or 4 women in heading up an automotive retail business in the UK, which is quite shocking still, I think, in this day and age in 2021. Nevertheless, it is a step in the right direction. And, you know, you can't worry about everybody else. You have to get your own house in order. So I guess, you know, it was hopefully a benefit for the organisation that I was able to take up that role. And I think the second part of the question, building the talent pipeline, it goes right back, I think, to how do we deal with work experience opportunities, internships, trainee programs. It goes right back to how do we, you know, Robert was talking earlier about, you know, doing talks to 12-year-old girls in a school. It goes right back to trying to make our industry, I think, attractive and attainable to females at the age when they're thinking about what their career choices might be. And I wouldn't profess that we're experts, you know, certainly in our organisation in this field. But even we've taken some recent steps. So if I give you an example, just for Christmas, we've undertaken quite a significant restructure in our service area in terms of the front of house roles that were available. We wanted to make some efficiency savings. We also wanted to make the roles actually a bit more flexible than they are traditionally. And in order to do that, we obviously had to design it so that, you know, it was accessible for many of our females to apply for. And having assessed those people, you know, in the same process for anybody that made an application for those jobs, we've come out of it with 43% of our service leaders being female. So that's quite a step change from where we were even before we started the process in October, November. So again, the job's not done just by having those leaders now in the business. The job for us is really not to tick the box and say, okay, the restructure's done, we've got a really nice balanced workforce now in that part of the organisation. the big job now is how do we really support those females to see what their future potential is, as more senior leaders in the business, or even lateral moves across our organisation as well. So I think, actually making the changes one step, and probably it's not easy because those changes are hard for people, but that's just the first step on the journey. The next bit is really to follow through. And I think, that's where we owe it to our people and to ourselves to make sure that we do that. But I think that's when you start to really make the change, and you see that talent opportunity going through the organisation. So I think if the pandemic's taught us nothing else, the need to be flexible is certainly one of the big lessons. When I joined, I remember maybe really naively coming in saying, how many roles could work from home, and it was very much you're not in wholesale anymore, you're in retail. I was like, yeah, I know, but do you have to be an invoicing operator and work at a site? I'm not sure you do. We operate in London. We have multiple issues around congestion and, constricted site space and all sorts of other things. Actually, taking people away from that environment helps, our staff that have to be there and our customers that can then perhaps get onto the site to do what they need to do with it. So, again, a little bit of your wholesale ideas, perhaps have another think. But actually, the pandemic's forced it to the point where, we've got all sorts of people who would have been, somewhere in an office occupying space who are now able to work from home. And of course, for our female population, many of whom have childcare responsibilities and, latterly homeschooling issues and all sorts of other things, it's been a tremendous opportunity to just take the bull by the horns and say, well, we've got to do it. There is no choice, and to find a way to work that into the business as well. So I think, if there's one positive thing out of it, it's been a real catalyst for us to embrace change that perhaps was forced upon us, that I think would have taken several years of me, banging the drum to really get that change happening.
Yeah, and you say that, these changes have had to take place. There's been the recalibration of processes and to enable this to take place, and the recalibration of the culture. So I'm now going to kind of carry on with that theme to James. So around our subject of change, Inchcape is a very large company, and how do you start to make the kind of change that Angela was talking about then, to become an inclusive culture with so many sites, with so many staff and so many different levels?
That's a really interesting question. A lot of what Angela just talked about it really resonates with me, to be fair. If you look at our UK business in Inchcape, it's fair to say if you went back 5 years, it was quite an old-fashioned business, run in a quite old-fashioned way. There was very little standardisation of process. We didn't really have, therefore, the right to take cost out. We weren't really a digitally focused business. And, we had to change that. That's one of the reasons I joined the business, to be fair. So we did have an opportunity, which doesn't present itself that often to well-established businesses, to change a lot of the people and to bring in some new talent. And we made a very conscious decision 4 years ago to get the gender balance in the right shape at a very senior level in our UK business. So whilst we were changing the shape of the business and sort of moving our business away from very franchise-focused organisations that were almost fiefdoms in themselves, with different processes, we recruited a whole load of people. And just give you a bit of a view, our commercial director is female, our HR and communications directors, our head of marketing across the group, our F&I director, our compliance director are all female. And we've got quite a lot of senior leaders coming through now from the franchise groups. Particularly, I'm really pleased to say in after sales positions, we've just recruited, and from within actually, we just recruited a new head of after sales from one of our brands into a very senior role, and really high hopes that she does very, very well. I think what's really important though is, firstly and frankly, we didn't choose these people because they were female. We chose them because, they were experts in their field. We thought they'd got potential. We thought that they could, really go the whole way within the business. And the bottom line is we made a huge effort to make sure that we attracted all sorts of candidates internally and externally from outside the business. And as Angela said, that means you've got to be really open to changing some of the processes and some of the things that you probably take for granted in terms of working hours and conditions and and reward and pay and all the rest of it. So we made a huge amount of effort. And actually, we make a huge amount of effort to develop them within their roles. And even in that 4-year period, I can think of 2 of those people that have gone into a much, much bigger role as they've come through. So it's definitely been a successful program for us. I wouldn't, to take the whole question, I wouldn't for a minute pretend that we think, or anybody else for that matter, thinks that we're perfect throughout the organisation. As you said, it's a big company. But I think what we have done is set the tone. So by setting the tone at a very senior level, I know we think differently about all of the roles that we recruit for in the wider business today. And one thing that we consciously did around about 2.5 years ago is to review at executive board level with our senior leadership team. Every Monday, we take an hour out to review every single vacancy that we have in the group. Now, when we started it was a monumental task. But actually, once you do it on a weekly routine, it's not, you might have 3 or 4 vacancies to review. But the reason we do that is to just look at the candidates that we've managed to attract and what we're thinking of doing, whether it's recruit from within, from without. If it's without, we look very hard at the candidate lists we've got. And that really takes some effort, to be fair, but we are absolutely seeing the benefit of it. It used to be very much in this industry that just because you were a high-performing sales exec, you became a business manager, you became a sales manager, and then potentially a head of business. I mean, that today, the business we're in is very different to that today, I think, across the board. And again, just touching back on the point I made a few minutes ago, and I think it's really important, and it came very much through on what Angela said. You've got to really, as an organisation, look hard at working hours and working conditions, because if you think that opening at 7:30 in the morning, closing at 7 o'clock at night, and expecting people to man the business for 7 days a week and those sort of hours is going to attract a wide range of people to your business, you're kidding yourself. You've got to make a change. You have to look at different working patterns. You have to make things work for families. It doesn't matter what the gender is. Or what background they're from. They might have young children. They might have all sorts of things that they need to do. So that bit of advice, again, practical advice is again, look really, really hard at how attractive you are as a candidate for that person who might want to apply to you.
Yes, I think we forget that sometimes, that it's a two-way process, isn't it?
It certainly is.
We're wanting to get the best skills and the best people, but we also, they choose us, they select where they work too. So
Absolutely.
Really good point there, James. So I'm going to turn to you now, Robert. So I'm sure that all of those on the call are pretty well informed about the business case with regards to gender balanced businesses. But what would you say, Robert, to people who question the validity of the business case?
I don't think anybody would really do it in our business, if I'm honest, because they probably get their head knocked off. I mean, it's patently obvious to anybody that, as everybody said, when 50% of the population are women and 85% of women strongly influence the purchase of a car, to have a male-dominated workforce is bonkers. The question you really want to ask these people is, what is their motivation? Are they anti-women, which I would have a major problem with? Are they thinking that we're going to promote women who are not suited to the job purely to hit a political correct box? And that's absolutely not what we're trying to do. We're trying to become a meritocracy, which whatever background, ethnicity, gender you are, if you work hard, do well, learn, soak up, and perform, you can go throughout the organization and go right to the top. Now, we're lucky in our business, as Angela said about her business. 33% of our PLC board are female, 22% of my senior team are female, including my CFO, Chief Marketing Officer, Commercial Director. I've got a male HR Director, which is pretty unusual. But I think that just goes to show that we want the best people for the job, irrespective. And the business case is self-evident. I mean, to put suboptimal people into jobs and expect to get above average business performance just isn't going to happen. And I don't think anybody in our business argues on this case. I think that debate has been had, gone, finished. And I don't think that's ever happened to me in the last couple of years, that question.
That's good to hear, because it is one of the things that we know the more we can communicate the strong business case or the benefits of diversity, inclusion, and gender balance, the more people become more accepting of it and see it less of a threat. It's a win-win for everyone in the organisation if the organisation is going to succeed. So it's good to hear that you aren't questioned on it, Robert. So I'm going to turn to Alex now and ask you, so what was the most difficult challenge that you've had to overcome on your journey to inclusion?
I think there's a gap between where the industry needs to get to eventually, and where the industry is today, for sure. But there's also a gap between where we are today and what the perception of the external perception of the industry is. So, I mean, I think there's still, we talk a lot about our view that this is a male-dominated industry, and historically, certainly it has been. But if you look at the shape of many organisations today, they've made massive progress towards balance. I mean, here at Volkswagen Group, we're 46% female. And I think it's important, therefore, that we're true about where we are today, and not talk up the problem beyond a realistic level. That allows us to focus on the progress we have still yet to make, which we need to focus on very strongly. But when I look at applicants into our organisation, the graduate applications are gender balanced, and there's good ethnic representation in there as well. A couple of years ago, 80% selected on meritocratic dimensions entirely. 80% of the graduate entry into our organisation was female. So I think that it's very important that we continue to represent ourselves accurately externally. We have people in our organisation, as do the other people on this call, who do fantastic outreach work from primary school to secondary school to colleges to universities, etc., to ensure that we're accurately represented as an attractive choice, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or any other dimension. I think a second point as well. Angela made I think a fantastically important point that really resonated with me, and Angela used the words personal crusade. This mustn't be a personal crusade, and I completely agree with that, and I think it's very important as well that sufficient effort is made to, if you like, engage the incumbent majority. So, within any diversity program, there'll be an incumbent majority whose natural reaction can be to feel threatened, to feel as if they're by definition there's going to be some kind of downside in it for them. And I think it's extremely important that we maintain an open dialogue around what the genuine importance of equality is, what the genuine importance of meritocracy is, to ensure that there's buy-in from the incumbent majority, and it doesn't become doesn't become characterized as a personal crusade. Oh, we've got to do this because Alex is really keen on it. And you don't want those conversations to be happening around the building. You want a really open dialogue. In that, if you're not convinced about the importance of equality, let's keep talking about it. Let me convince you. Let your peers convince you that this is something that has an ethical imperative and a business imperative. It's really important that those conversations are brought to the surface and not buried and left to fester somewhere. So that's a challenge, because you have to ask for feedback. You have to ensure your engagement is really wide, because these conversations aren't necessarily going to come to the surface without you really really probing in that direction. So I'd say those are the two greatest challenges.
And of course, it's really important that we acknowledge that people in MDs and CEO roles are stewards, running the business for a certain period of time, but not forever. And it's leaving a lasting legacy behind, isn't it, for your successors and for the other people in the business to
Absolutely.
carry it on once you move on to other pastures new.
Yeah, precisely.
So I'm going to finally ask Nathan. So when I founded the Automotive 30% Club, my vision was that it would be a network of leaders who would collaborate on this issue to positively change the whole sector's reputation and the reality that actually goes on in the sector. And balancing competition with collaboration is a key skill of a game-changing leader. So can you explain how Auto Trader works with others to help the sector as a whole become inclusive?
Yeah, I mean, I think on diversity and inclusion, we kind of straddle two sectors, both which have for different reasons, challenges, particularly around gender diversity, and that's technology and the automotive space. My personal view is that I'm not sure we need to let the concerns about, obviously there are things that we've got to always be aware of, but I'm not sure the concerns around competition and competition regulation needs to play in to us actually working together to be kind of create a positive change in the bit of society that work within the our own organisations, and actually drawing more talent into the industry. That feels like that's something that is literally in everyone's interests. And my experience of working, with the people on the call and many others, is that balancing the competition and doing something for the common good is something that we've all become very, very comfortable with. So we don't really see an issue there. And that's also for people that would be seen as more direct competitors of Auto Trader. They come along to our diversity and inclusion events as well. So some of the things that we do, because of the size of our organisation and the resources that we have, for some of our smaller customers, they might not be able to run some of the programs, certainly that James, Alex and Robert and Angela might be able to run in their own organisation. So we do offer to run diversity and inclusion workshops, which are very similar to the ones that James spoke about, that kind of induction, what's the issue, what is it all about. We obviously share publicly, and I do think that's setting the tone when you have, a group of people within the industry that all have great influence, like the people on this call. It helps set the tone that as an industry we do care about that, and I think that's incredibly important. It's all about that external perception that I think Alex was speaking about. We also do courageous conversations, which obviously you know a lot about, Julia. We do Code Club within schools, so that's more on the technology side of what we do, but our people will go in and teach school classes to code, and that engineering is a job that anyone can do and be good at. And finally, we support charities and organisations that are looking to further this within the industry as well, which an obvious one is the Automotive 30% Club, working with you, Julia, but also the National Autistic Society on some other elements, inclusive companies and other areas. So we put some of our money to work that with organisations that can have a bit broader impact than perhaps we could on our own.
Very true, very true. Thanks for that, Nathan. So I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience now. I've actually got quite a lot coming in, so that's really great. Please do keep sending them. I'm going to start with one from Hannah. And Hannah asks, and I'm going to put this to prepare you now. I'm going to put this one to Alex first. When looking at the senior roles and the talent pipeline where you've made progress getting women into those roles, how would you say you've done with getting diverse women into such roles? Do you think there's more work to be done in this space where it comes to diverse women?
How do we think we've done? Not as well as we need to do, for sure, is the first thing to say. I think we've obviously had a focus on gender equality today, but I think the principles that are being discussed are equally applicable to any dimension of equality. And I think that in terms of the actions that we've taken at Volkswagen Group, we have employee network groups now set up that are highly active in the organisation, to ensure that all dimensions are well represented. So I don't think gender diversity is the only subject that needs to be addressed. I think that the principles that we're applying to improving gender diversity in our organisation are equally applicable to every other dimension. and it's something that is reviewed by the board on a monthly basis in terms of the level of diversity that we have in the organisation across all dimensions, and the representation that we have at all levels in the organisation. So have we got to the destination point yet? No, nowhere near it. Are we making positive steps, and do we have programs in place that are going to assist and accelerate on that journey? Yes, we do. So it's we're on the journey, but not at the destination.
Thanks, Alex. We've got another question that's very similar to that, and I'm going to actually put this to Robert. So you've made it clear that gender diversity and inclusion is important, but what do you actually do within Vertu then to ensure that ethnic diversity is also taken into account?
Well, I'm a great believer in equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome. Equality of outcome I have a particular theoretical problem with, but equality of opportunity is absolutely business critical. So irrespective of ethnicity, gender, or any other differentiator, the crucial thing is, what is the organisation to do to remove the barriers that stop people of all ages or gender fulfilling their individual potential? So we have programs that take people from whatever level they are, and then put them on development programs and mentoring programs to effectively drive them through the business. Now, that doesn't necessarily highlight females particularly, but we have seen, particularly in the after sales side of the business, a step change in, and somebody referred to it before, in the number of female service managers that we have. And it's because we've taken them as service advisors. They've got potential. They never really thought they could be a service manager, and we've taken them on a journey through development over a period of time. But I'm really focused on making sure we maximize the meritocracy and promote the best people possible and unleash the potential that is in our business. Because we've got massive, people say there's a shortage of talent in the industry. There isn't a shortage of talent. There's a shortage of talent that actually thinks it is talent. Actually is the problem, and it's getting people's mindset to open up, that they're not stuck in a job forever, that they have talent and can progress. And I think that's the key to all these diversity issues. And I actually think, and we actually did our 3-hour talent 6-monthly review yesterday, where we looked at everybody in grid 9, and actually everybody in grid 1, grid 9 being the high potentials. And I was amazed actually by the amount of ethnic diversity and the amount of females in grid 9, which clearly is beneficial. And I don't think there was any bias in that. Nobody got any prizes for making sure there were a lot of females in grid 9. It was the fact that the culture of the business and the development programs are throwing up a lot of gender diversity.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. So I have another question here. This is from Julia Greenough, and I'm going to put this to you, Angela, because I think it's as a response to one of the things that you mentioned. And she asks, how do you make clear in your communications that this is high on your agenda as a leader without it looking like you're on a personal crusade? Is it in data sharing or aligning with performance, or are there other ideas you could share?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And I think, as I said, we're really right at the start of our journey. But I do think what's become patently clear to us is communication is absolutely critical. So it's finding a balance whereby this doesn't become the only topic on the agenda, but we raise it as one of our, so the way we've communicated it actually is to say, we've got a people and culture meeting. We have that every month. That's all around, every kind of, as Alex and everybody else have talked about, every kind of area of diversity in the company. And you can imagine with 1,500 employees, we've got everything. As I said, we're in London, so it's hugely multicultural anyway, and that's in all sectors of the business, whether it's sales, service, or even a back office function. So for me, what we've tried to start off by doing is to say, and in fact, we've used this conference as a really useful kind of opportunity to put a stake in the ground and say, look, we're part of the Automotive 30 Club. We joined last year. With everything else going on, we probably didn't make as much of it as we wanted to, but we did lay some foundations down in terms of our planning. So the first thing we did was to write out to our management community And we didn't have a particularly strong management community communications channel either. So that again has been set up over the course of the pandemic because they've needed to know so many different things. We use this as an opportunity to say, look, we're at this conference, you can join, please join us. It's not mandatory. We'd love you to take part if you're interested in this topic. So I'll be interested to see from you later how many of our colleagues have joined, but start to open it up like that. So again, it's putting it on the agenda, it's putting it out there, but it isn't forcing it in any way. It's optional. And I know many of my senior leadership colleagues are on here, and I'm sure if we're able to access the streaming afterwards, we can promote that again with a wider community. So it's I would say, a relatively soft approach. But I think, to the point, if I go really hard on it, then it will be seen as, a personal crusade, the only thing we care about. And it's just one of the things we care about. But it is an important one where we have to take some steps. And, this joining the club and joining this conference is a brilliant way of just getting it out there, and something people can join in and see and learn from others on. So yeah, very simple and pragmatic, really, I would say.
And just kind of building on that point about people being aware of the fact that your company is on this journey, and I'd just like to put this to James, actually. Do you think, or are you aware whether investors appreciate the focus on gender balance and diversity?
I think the truth of it is the investment community do. I mean, Robert will tell you I'm pretty much sure he'd say exactly the same. I mean, at a corporate level, we get asked regularly about, what are our policies and what are our procedures. But I think, it's easy to tick that box and say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I understand it, and set up a panel or do whatever it happens to be. I think what's much more difficult is actually doing it. So the direct answer to your question is, do I think investors think that most public companies have a focus? Yes, I do. I think they do, because they've forced that agenda. I'm not entirely sure that all public companies actually have that agenda and do something about it. It's kind of the point I'm making.
Yeah. You think that they'll write
and
nice
I actually
words?
had a conversation yesterday, Julia, I had a conversation yesterday with one of our largest shareholders, who's the largest shareholder in the world in the stock markets, and he's very, very focused on the ESG agenda. No question at all. Because it drives value fundamentally. Yeah.
Well, as we know, in one of our, we have it as a topic tomorrow, but values, strongly held values create shareholder value. And that's what investors are looking for. And they understand the business case, and they know that companies are more profitable. So there is a really good story for investors to share with them what it is that you're doing, actually taking action and not just speaking about it.
But I think the point, I kind of made the point earlier on, didn't I, Jenny, really? If you have a balanced business that mirrors the community that you're in every way, then you will perform better. I mean, it is a fact. So it underlines the reason why investors want that to be right at the top of the agenda.
And just bringing into the conversation again the point about it being genuine and not performative support for this cause. I have a question here from Elaine, and I'm going to put this, I'll put this to Nathan, I think, first, and then maybe bring in Robert. So our younger generation colleagues hold the key as they see diversity and gender differently to us. As leaders, we need to ensure we have strong succession planning and a strong meritocratic culture. What are the leaders on the panel doing to create and drive a strong culture within their business? So Nathan first, and then maybe Robert, if you could add.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very big question in some ways. I mean, speaking to it from the diversity and inclusion angle specifically, because I think for us, that's an area where we've done it perhaps slightly differently, and it's worked really well. We did set the tone from the top of the organisation that this is something that we felt was important for us to embrace as an organisation. But very quickly then, rather than it being a top-down edict or a personal crusade, as Angela and both Alex have spoken about, We then created networks within the organisation, whether it was the Women's Network, which I think you know about, Julia, a BAME network, Neurodiversity Network. A whole bunch of networks have popped up, and those things have popped up, I guess, with permission, but very much have self-formed. And actually, that's groups of people that get together, and they might just be having a coffee and talking about what's going on, you know, at the thick of the Black Lives Matter movement. Obviously, there were a lot of our colleagues that wanted to speak with one another about the impact that it had on them. And those networks, as we call them, or guilds, tend to be the ones that are bubbling up. These are the issues we're seeing. These are the ideas that we have. These are the things that we need to think about. You know, and that can be from very, very small things like the impact of air dryers on people that might be neurodiverse, right through to some of the biggest policies we have that are around working patterns and hours. So I think the biggest thing that we've done that's really enabled us to embrace diversity and inclusion, but also make that a really positive, cemented part of our culture, is letting go, actually, and not pretending that we've got all the answers, but definitely giving permission for people to have those conversations, to be empowered, to meet together and have a voice within the organisation as to some of the things that we need to change, because they're not always the things that we might come up with when we're, you know, strategizing and thinking at the highest level of the organization.
And Robert, can you add any points about
well, I've got
culture?
three teenagers, so I have some insight into the modern thinking in terms of people who are still at school, and it's certainly different than the thinking I had when I was a teenager. I actually think one of the biggest issues in diversity, and that could be a massive unleashing of power here, which I think would be really useful to tap into, is if I spend a lot of time with my inner circle, in my key direct reports, I am speaking to people who are broadly over 50. And I think that's quite dangerous, because we grew up before the iPad and the iPhone. We're not as digitally savvy. So actually, we're trying to spend a lot more time promoting people who are young. We've just taken a very talented general manager and made him a director. He's 32. I think we're over the moon with that, because I think it'll unleash a lot of energy. And actually, outside my office, I've got a couple of digital marketing apprentices who, frankly, were struggling working from home. I don't think they were learning quite as much as they'd have learned if they were with their peers. So I've now got them outside my office at 2 meters distance, and I can spend time with them, and they can do things for me, and we can transfer knowledge both ways, because they have a different perspective on values and on diversity, but also just on how the world is. And I think as we get older, we're going to have to unleash the thinking of these younger people to see how the world is going to change, because it will be different. We're going to see massive changes in 5 years, and 50-year-olds haven't got all the answers. Yeah.
And just sharing your pain, if you like, of having teenagers. The way that my teenagers reacted to the Black Lives Matter movement, the fight for civil rights in the US over the summer, it was very eye-opening in terms of where their values lie and where their priorities lie. And of course, they're reflective of the future customer base and employee base that we'll be working with in the future. So just on that point, I'd just like to perhaps put this one to Alex, because we did see a lot of very strong response from automotive manufacturers with regards to Black Lives Matter, particularly those based in Detroit, where a high proportion of their workforce are Black. And so I have a question here from Anita. She manages a team with 50% BAME representation. And during the summer, the coverage of the Black Lives Matter movement was in the press. There's an extreme emotional time, and creating psychologically safe space for her team members to talk about the situation as it was unfolding became very important and welcomed by the whole team. So her question to you, Alex, is how do you focus on the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion and create psychologically safe places at work, and also perhaps if you could bring in about Volkswagen Group's reaction to the civil rights movement.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I referenced them earlier. We have employee network groups in the organisation, and one of those is focused on matters of ethnicity. I think it's fundamentally important to remember that it's not up to you know, it's not my place or anybody else's place to suggest to any minority how they should be feeling or what sort of experience they should have at work. That has to come the other way, and that's what the value for me of having these very strong, very active employee network groups in the organisation is, because it means that that really good quality feedback is propagated throughout the organisation and can be listened to and can be acted on. And I think also hopefully that gives gives minorities it gives colleagues who are members of minorities in our organisation a level of confidence that communication is open and is listened to and is active and so on and so forth. I catch up very, very regularly with Sneha, who chairs our BAME employee network group, and we have a very, very open and productive discussion. I also get good feedback through reverse mentoring, and I've found that extremely valuable over the last few months, because it gives me personally the opportunity to listen to concerns from someone who is a different gender, a different ethnicity, and a different generation to me. And I find that personally, I find that hugely valuable. I recommend that to anybody. It's challenging and it's eye-opening, and it's I find it a fantastically valuable process. Particularly with regard to Black Lives Matter, I thought, it was very important. A couple of the members of the board of management here had discussions with members of the employee network group, and it was very evident that there was a wish for the company to take a position and to not leave anything in a vacuum. And it didn't, it might have felt like a bit of a slap in the face to receive that feedback, but it was a very productive slap in the face to get. And I'm glad, I'm really reassured actually that we have an employee network group that feels, confident and secure enough to come to me or come to another director and say, you know what, you need to be more vocal on this subject. You need to take a position here. You need to not let a vacuum be created rather. So I express my views. I write a blog every week that goes out on our intranet, and it's a subject that I covered in terms of the horror that I'd felt and the discomfort, the horrific discomfort that it made me feel, and therefore to let everybody know in the organisation that this is not something that can just be glossed over or passes by, and is has a deep effect on everybody, but a very, very deep effect on some of our colleagues. If we're not standing with those colleagues, then we're letting everybody down. So I think in terms of making sure that those paths of dialogue stay open, that everybody's confident enough that they can give feedback, that nothing gets buried, no subject is taboo. I think that's the fundamentally important point. I'm really in the last year actually, I'm really proud of the progress we've made in this organisation on that subject. It's going in the right direction. I feel substantially more satisfied now than I did maybe a couple of years ago.
I think it certainly this year has shown us, this past year, how important it is that if you are staking a claim to be an inclusive leader, an inclusive organisation, you actually have to take a position and be anti-sexist, anti-racist, anti-homophobic, and make that very clear. We perhaps didn't realise that it had to be so overt, that you had to articulate those words, because it was kind of evident but I think we've learned the benefit of doing that.
I mean, look, if you're a leader in an organisation, and anybody would tell you this, I think your primary role is to represent the people that work for you. And if you're not representing everybody, then you're failing. You're not a leader. So that for all of us here is critically important.
And perhaps if I can just bring you in, Angela, because you said, your workforce is very diverse already. Maybe not necessarily gender balanced totally yet, but very diverse. So did you experience, the situation with regards to this, and did you have to take a position and reassure your workforce?
Yeah, I think we're in a slightly different position. So from a corporate perspective, I think we would be led as to what position we would take, and the position is always very neutral on anything political in that regard. And actually, I found that really helpful because, to Alex's point, if you're not standing up to be counted for everybody that works for you, then you're not a leader at all. So we took a slightly different route. And, obviously I had the opportunity as a new CEO last year. It was about asking for feedback from anybody in the organisation direct to me and the leadership team. So opening up a channel for anybody on any topic to be able to raise any concerns about the organisation. That could be something as, trivial as, relatively trivial, I should say, tools that they don't have in the workshop, or it could be something, and we had many colleagues last year, particularly from the BAME community, that actually were writing in to me saying, what are you doing for the BAME community, who are clearly more at risk from COVID than perhaps some of our other colleagues in the business. So what are you doing specifically? And the answer is, we weren't doing anything specifically, but these are all the things we're doing for everybody. So it was much less about making a stance on any particular topic. It was much more about saying, I'm here, my email inbox is open, my door is open, I will be in the sites. Please, whatever you've got to say about this organisation, just tell me what it is. And it has been interesting. And again, we're really on in the start of our journey, but we set up a kind of specific email link. It goes out with every communication, whether that's about reminding people about staying safe during COVID, or whether it's about, gender diversity is on the table. Here's the 30% conference that you can join. Whatever it is, there's always an email link that says you can contact any of us through that. And when they do that, I'm normally the one that responds, or if it's not me, then it's one of the senior leadership team. So we're in a different place, but I do think, we're getting a raft of really interesting questions. It can be about employee behaviour, it can be about something quite material, it can be about, the more political things that is slightly more challenging for us to take a position on because we are led by our corporate organisation. But it's creating that open and transparent culture, and I think we've been very clear with our employees and our management team that is what we're striving for. And the gender piece, the diversity piece is included in that, but first of all, it's about having the transparency and the response. We have to provide a response, so we're doing our very best to at least respond to those questions that are coming in very, very quickly. And I think, in most instances I can think of, we have resolved the issues. So, and I'm sure some people think if you do that, you're opening the floodgates and letting yourself in for all sorts of things, but that's not the case. People have been really sensible in the topics they've addressed to us. That's, again, very, very simple things to put into place, but they weren't there before. So
important to make sure that the employees feel that they're listened to.
Yes. And they get a response when they do raise something with us, whether that's something more formal we have to invoke, or whether it's something we can just respond and say, yeah, we'll do that, or here's the position we're taking. So
great, thanks for sharing that, Angela. So we now draw the Q&A session from the audience to a close, but I would like to end by asking you all a question. So I'd suggest that perpetuating the status quo in your organisation and missing out on the benefits that an inclusive culture brings is settling for less. So doing nothing to change isn't really an option. And with power comes the responsibility to act. So what advice would you give to those watching about becoming a leader that changes the game to create an inclusive 21st century automotive workforce? And I'm going to ask you to start, please, Nathan.
Thanks, Julie. I think a lot of these topics have come up reasonably organically throughout the course of the conversation, but I thought it was James's comments around the the difficulty of going through the training on inclusion and diversity, where you really come to terms with what it might feel like not to stand in my shoes, but to stand in someone else's shoes, and how the world looks so differently. And I know every time I do any form of training that kind of puts that angle on the world, you have that moment where you realise that actually the world isn't looking the same to everyone else as it's looking to me. If anything, I'm in a particularly privileged position. So I think investing time in really understanding it. There's plenty of books out there, whether it's, well, you've got your own book, obviously, Julie, that's just out, but on whether it's ethnicity, neurodiversity, gender, there are plenty of books out there, and it doesn't take a lot of time to really start to understand how this impacts people. And then I think it pretty immediately falls on most reasonable people, and most people are reasonable, good people, to do something about it. So for me, it was the moment that the light bulb came on and I saw something that I hadn't seen previously. Moving to action was, it would have been harder to actually continue with inaction, if I'm honest. The second thing I would say is, I think as leaders of organisations, you need to set out your stall and make sure people know that it's a priority. But at the same time, I think both Angela, again, and Alex said this, I think priorities can come from the top, but at the end of the day, any priority, including diversity and inclusion, needs to really be owned and understood by the organisation. Otherwise, these things just don't happen. So I think it's as important that you do call out, this is something we want to make a difference to, but you need to bring, I think it might have been Alex again that talked about the incumbent majority, bring people on that journey so they can kind of go through that same understanding process as you did. And then finally, I'd say it is about involving the organisation. We've talked quite a bit about networks, communication, making sure people have safe spaces where they can talk about anything, and that anything that needs to be raised up to people leading organisations can happen is absolutely critical in my mind. So they'd be the three I'd suggest.
Great, thanks, Nathan. And Angela, what would your advice be?
I guess I've got four things, and some of them already cross over with what Nathan said, but I'm probably well renowned for writing everything in a red and black book, and I chuckled to myself when I started a new one yesterday, because the front piece said the first step is taking one, and I think that is probably my first piece of advice. Having a plan and not really doing anything about it is not an option. So you've just got to get off your backside and do something. That starts the whole momentum off, I think, even if it's very, very small. I think the second thing, again, as Nathan's already said, it's got to be authentic. I think it's so easy for people to see that it's just a corporate tick box exercise potentially, and it absolutely has to come from the top, and it has to come from the heart, and you have to convince your leadership team and the people supporting you that it's the right thing to do, and you can't make them feel that. It's got to be a convincing conversation that they buy into for all the reasons we've said, from a business case and common sense and everything else. So the third thing, I guess, is just start small. So it's a bit like the first step, take one. I think small incremental change is much easier to manage. I think it does have an avalanche effect potentially. And obviously we're very early on in that journey. And then lastly, make sure you communicate it, but don't put it above everything else on the agenda. And I think sometimes, don't go and do it in the dark and so nobody knows about it, but it's small sound bites, isn't it, regularly being sent out so that people understand that it's being looked at, they see things that link to it, and they can join the dots themselves without you always having to join the dots for them. So that would be my four pieces of advice, not one, sorry.
Thanks, Angela. So, Robert, what guidance can you give to our audience?
Well, the question has in it becoming a leader. So I think I go straight back to sort of what is a leader. And I think a leader's got to show three things, and it goes straight to the heart of this conversation. One is you've got to have the right character, which then comes back to values. 2, you've got to be competent. And 3, you've got to have consistency. So it's being consistent in the right communication, attitudes, values, and not letting that drop. Then the leader's primary role is to provide clarity to the organisation around the values and doing that consistently and just being very, very clear about what the organisation's about, what is acceptable behaviour and where we're going, providing the vision. And the vision is a more gender balanced workforce. And then if you're going to have values, I mean, it's easy for chief executives to talk about values. That's dead easy. It's doing the values is a bit more of a challenge. So it's walking the talk and measuring it. Actually, we measure the extent to which our 6,000 employees believe the directors actually do the values. And luckily, 93% of our colleagues think the directors actively practice the values, which is probably the most single important measurement we have. Actually, it's probably more important than profit. So it's just being very clear, consistent, and having a values-driven business, and then this will happen.
Great, thanks, Robert. And over to you, James. What can you add?
So, well, I mean, we've kind of talked about a lot of this as we've gone through. I think, in all honesty, I think Alex nailed it when he talked about you have a duty to represent and take on the views of every single person you've got within your team. I think, for me, the most important thing about being a leader is that you don't have, you really recognise that you don't have all of the answers. If you look through, if I sort of reflect back on my career, I've worked with some people who are senior to me who really, really understood that. I've also worked with, 1 or 2 people who absolutely didn't. And I know which approach is the most effective, absolutely. So, I mean, my view is really simple. Surround yourself with high-performing people of the most diverse nature that you possibly can do, hence the point I was making earlier on. And actually, most importantly, allow them to feel comfortable in challenging each other and yourself. And listen, take on board what you're being told. And of course, as a leader, it's your job ultimately to listen to all the feedback and ultimately, set the course. But you've got to listen to what people that you trust and believe in are telling you. I mean, one of the things, again, back to practical level, one of the things that I do regularly and through this pandemic has been, much more difficult, but actually much more rewarding, really, because we've had to do it on VCon and we've really had to put some more effort in preparation. One of the things I do is I try and talk to at least once a week. I try and pull a number of our businesses in at line leadership level and just talk about the challenges they face, what they're doing, what have they got the messages we're putting out there, what could we do better, and it's amazing what you find out. It's amazing how you can really, in fact, it's staggering actually how you progress by doing that. Things that you wouldn't necessarily know previously. So my message really is all about inclusion.
Thanks, James. So let's give the final word to Alex.
Thanks, Julia. I think, first of all, work very hard on promoting a speak-up culture so that the discussions can be had very, very openly. Seek a lot of feedback from a wide range of sources, and then maybe it doesn't go without saying, listen to it and act on it and show that you're acting on it. And then the final thing I think is if you ever find yourself feeling like you're about to accept an excuse in this dimension, then go and find a mirror, stare into it, and give yourself a good talking to, and come back more convincing.
That's my favourite one. Thank you. So, real words of wisdom from everybody there. And our panel members will be leaving us now to go into the virtual rooms for the roundtable discussions, so you can join them. And also our patrons that were on the discussion earlier on. So you can join them to continue with the conversation. But I'll draw this session to a close now by once again saying thanks very much to Alex, Nathan, Angela, Robert and James, and see you all in the breakout rooms.
Thank you. Thanks.
Before we all join the roundtable discussions, I'd like to say a few closing words. So has what you've heard this morning managed to convince you that building a gender-balanced, inclusive business is not only the right thing to do for your business, your customers and your employees, but that it's also the right thing for society? that inequity, inequality, and exclusion really do exist, you might be thinking, why doesn't someone do something about this? And as I mentioned in the panel discussion just now, that someone should be you. Doing nothing to change it is not really an option, because with power comes the responsibility to act. But have we outlined a compelling enough argument to motivate you to personally want to act and to do it now? Do you want to be a game-changing leader? You've heard the case for change outlined by our external expert, John Amici, as well as some of the most senior and influential figures in automotive. You've also heard what they're doing in their own organisations to build winning gender-balanced businesses. I hope that you'll take their best practice and advice back to your organisations and start to implement similar solutions. Tomorrow we'll focus on even more practical aspects of the actions we need to take to become inclusive companies and to tap into the superior business success. We will show you how people working in member companies can become more involved in the Automotive 30% Club's activities by volunteering in virtual school outreach activities or joining the Inspiring Super Network or nominating your fabulous female colleagues for the Inspiring Automotive Women Awards. We'll have club patron Dr. Astrid Fontaine, member of the board for People, Digitisation and IT at Bentley Motors, in conversation with Molly Q. Ford, Vice President of Global Equality Programmes at our conference sponsor Salesforce. They are both top executives with global responsibility for equality, diversity and inclusion, and they will explore the premise that values create value. I'll provide more advice as to how we can change the game, and I'll run through the 6 steps to success to enable you to build a winning gender-balanced business, and we'll have 3 masterclasses featuring senior executives that each cover 2 of the steps. The guests will share how they are addressing the steps in their organisations. Then our masterclass guests will appear along with our patron Christian Elverforce, MD of Volvo Cars UK, to answer your questions about the content we've covered during the conference. Please do start to submit your questions now. So that draws to a close the main conference sessions today, and we'll move now to the virtual breakout rooms for the final session of the day, our round table discussions. In each virtual room there will be some of our conference participants as well as other delegates, and the conversation will be facilitated by hosts. Please do take a moment after the roundtables to complete the short feedback form. This will enable us to assess the impact of the event and continually improve our conference experience for you. Also, please do share your views about our conference on social media using the hashtag Auto30ClubConf. Thanks for watching up to now, and I'll look forward to virtually meeting with you all again tomorrow morning. So goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day.